Wow.
Yeah.
Josie Watson, you back now? You ready to tell us where you are?
Oh yeah, I'm in rural Vermont. Wi-Fi a little spotty. Sorry about that.
No
Let's see.
worries.
Who else?
Basil hasn't gone yet.
Yes.
Also,
Basil.
Oklahoma.
Nice.
Ryan, where are you in the world?
Hey, I'm in Marquette, Michigan, swinging my daughter here on a swing, looking for mushrooms.
So did we hear from everybody? Did we get everybody? Home working, where are you?
Charles here in Lumberton, Mississippi at the All You Need Institute.
Well, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Nice.
Sergio, where are you?
Sergio Togliatti. I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco.
Yeah. I think we got everybody.
I'm out here in outside of
Oh,
Asheville, North Carolina, and just
Hi,
wanted to point out it's
play?
home worlding. Home worlding.
You want to play?
Thanks.
All right, come here.
Could you
That's Henry.
so somebody the guy
Hi,
who's
Henry.
with on the phone, I mean with the swing, can you mute please? Thank
believe
you.
it's-
Okay.
Hey, Sydney.
So Ansley, would you like to Sydney's already gone. Everybody else is gone, I believe. Ansley, do you want to introduce our wisdom panel, which at least includes Fidel if he's here? I don't think I see Charles Eisenstein here.
Yes, I don't either. But I don't know if Fidel is on either. He was on, like, Theo and him should be together, but I don't know that they're on.
Okay.
So
So we don't have to introduce them until they join.
Yeah, I think first order of business maybe would be syncopate together and then give Scott Smith the floor.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Super, super grateful that we are here to help our neighbors in a crisis situation. I know we all just spoke that we're here from all over the world, and we hope to extend this network to a rising tide lift all ships and help our neighbors. So Fidel is at Qigong and he will get when he will join when he gets home. So yeah, I think that's all the opening that I want to give. I don't think there needs to be more than that. Scott, I'd love to pass it to you. We are here in support of the community.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how to start this, and I want to use an analogy. Let's say, because it's great to see Bob, and I know Bob and respect him and everyone on here immensely. So let's say Bob Bowcock and he comes out to my house where I live in Cape Cod, and we start burning vinyl chloride and spraying stuff into the air. All the neighbors start getting rashes, burning, having seizures, going to the hospital, and the EPA comes in and the CDC comes in and says nothing to see here. It's mass psychosis. It's in your head. I mean, obviously that is the ridiculous analogy as to what is going on in East Palestine. Because if this were any of us in a situation like this, we'd be probably behind bars. Bob, is that a good analogy?
Gotta find my mute. Yeah, that's certainly part of what's going on here. They're gaslighting them. They're basically telling them what you're experiencing isn't real, and we're very cognizant of the fact that that's just not true.
And I have to say, I mean, there's some recent developments. I sent around some of the latest media, so hopefully everybody on the group saw it. I don't want to be redundant, but I've been in over 60 disasters, and I've never seen where people are getting sicker and sicker. But the optimism I have, it's like this call and the people coming together. I have people that have reached out to me, 5 people of experts, over 150 years of dioxin contamination experience. 4 of them can't reveal their names yet, but you would recognize them and their institutions because they saw me. But Dr. Beatrice Gollum reached out. And this is what's different about this one. Dr. Beatrice Golem is the doctor that helped our vets with the burn pits in Iraq. The government said it's mass psychosis, it's stress, you're not really having symptoms. And to put things very simply, what you see the EPA doing and the CDC basically referencing a singular chemical, a singular exposure, as if it's an OSHA thing for 8 hours a day. And these people being bombarded with 24/7. And I get the testing data, do the work on the ground, and I'm being advised by qualified subject matter experts in this area. And like Dr. Golem has stated over and over, we've identified about 50 different chemicals. There are perhaps more when you look at all the independent research. But for every 10 chemicals, there are 1,000 different combinations. There are no standards with these chemicals combining. For example, the CDC even has a scientific paper out about how dioxins can combine with phthalates. Phthalates are a plasticizer used in plastics. So a lot of these, there simply are no standards with a lot of this. And like we say, you can't find what you don't look for. And I think we're at a point in this country where the undue influence of the lobbyists, the PR, there's no doubt that the PR people are calling all the shots and exercising their undue influence. And I want to be clear, if the fact that our government needs public information officers is a red flag, because if I've worked in a lot of different EPA regions and oil spills, and then I got to tell you, 95% of the EPA workers and the scientists, if they were allowed to speak the truth, it would be a lot better for the community, but they're not. And they know what's going on. And what you see is, again, the undue influence of the railroad controlling the narrative. But what's different this time, I've never had so many calls from investigative journalists as wanting to be educated and understand, and the community is getting educated. And the problem is the health assessment. It doesn't look like the government is going to do that. And we need a broad community like this to rally around and get a health assessment, blood testing done, so these residents can get the help that they need. So I just wanted to start with that as a kind of a general introduction. And we're testing furnace filters. We're testing the soil where the downspouts are. And again, I'm being guided by experts, to the experts that aren't ready to come forward with their names, but they will have 40 years in dioxin experience, and we're involved in DuPont and Dow and cleanups. And they also have all the NOAA weather patterns and everything about the plumes. And I don't know how many people know this. I'm sure, Bob, you do, but it's my understanding from the expert team I have around me that there was effectively like a thermal inversion vortex. I'm not a weather person, so I may be not using the correct terms, but when they did the controlled burn, it was the worst of all conditions because that plume hovered above the ground and didn't, and inverted, and it went everywhere. And the whole thing is we've laid out the plume impact versus the non-plume impact, and fingerprint is what these experts will tell you about. We've been able to identify, for example, Sulphur Run has a different fingerprint of dioxins and semi-volatile organic compounds versus non-plume impact. We have the actual weather data. These experts cataloged it, and we're working on an interactive map. We're approaching 30 homes. We have the control, and we also have controls, meaning where we know the plume was not. So, and I sent, again, last night, I sent around an example of one impacted home and resident that are testing positive repeatedly for vinyl chloride in their urine. And there's a lot of concern about the dust particles and the excavation going on. It's also my understanding that vinyl chloride leaves your system pretty rapidly, like 24 to 48 hours. And the fact that these people are continually testing positive in their urine for vinyl chloride strongly suggest that there's constant exposure. So with that being said, that's kind of a broad overview. I mean, any comments, any questions? And I look at this as a collaboration. No one person has the answers.
Ellie, you have a question. She was the first to note in our comments.
Yeah, I have a question and also some things to share maybe that are of use. So the question that I asked in the chat was, what are the symptoms that people are experiencing? And I also just wanted to throw in, so I'm collaborating with the NSF on, I have collaborated with the NSF on an innovation sprint for building what's called knowledge networks. And basically there's now a proposal out to produce like a public asset for some kind of, problem in a community space. And we're actually preparing a proposal around this. So if there's specific kinds of information that would be of value to like the residents or decision makers, so that they actually know what's happening with weather patterns and can make better choices about when and where to do horrible incinerations of chemicals. We would like to build that out. So I'd love to talk offline with you maybe about more of those details.
Okay, great. And I'm glad you brought that up. And one of the things that I'm very frustrated about is the women's issues. They were scared to talk about it. And I had an interview with Chris Cuomo and we went public with it. But one of the things that frustrates me is I told the EPA, they did not know until Thursday about the female issues. And you don't even need to do any testing to know that there are issues, because the women's menstrual cycles, heavy clotting, lots of pain, it is like an epidemic. And none of that was ubiquitous in the community. You really don't even need to get into my testing or anybody else's, and it's getting worse. And now with seizures and other things. And there's also new information in the last 72 hours. Multiple people that left town, that packed up their boxes and moved away, started unpacking their boxes, and all their symptoms came back. Kidney malfunctions, blood in their urine, little kids, coughing and the burning. And the fact that the EPA, who I understand is not even authorized to make medical statements, and the EPA continues to say nothing to see here. There are all these levels are below the threshold, and they are knowingly citing OSHA standards for like 8 to 10 hour exposure for a singular exposure to a singular chemical when you have all these chemicals combining.
Hey, Anthony. You're coming in and out. Can I call you in about 45 minutes, bro?
Sam, you're being very loud. Do you mind? Oh, is that Fidel? Oh, thank you. Welcome, Fidel.
You're funny.
Sorry.
So good. Thank you for that, Scott. Yeah, Fidel just joined. And I wanted to also say, I didn't introduce you. I apologize, Scott, but I know you're Chief Sustainability Officer at Eco Integrated Technologies and have been in and out of East Palestine. You said this was your 8th time.
Yeah, it's my 8th time. And right now, in what I do, I'm CEO of 2 other companies, but this specific company on an unrelated, I sold some patents, and part of my agreement, they wanted me to join the company. And part of what we're trying to do is do a model of corporate citizenship. And in my, in my agreement to be Chief Sustainability Officer, I required for me to take the role that when there's a disaster like this, they fund me to go in there, no strings attached. We release to the residents and we do testing. And we've spent right now, we're approaching $70,000 in dioxin testing and a lot of SVOC testing. And we're using urethans, and there's no question the EPA accepts all the data. And dioxin tests are about $550 a test, and it's well worth it. And the big debate with the EPA is dioxins are ubiquitous in the environment. And there's a big difference between facts and the truth. Okay. So if you're grilling, yeah, there are dioxins, but for example, the control samples we have in Bull Creek have not only much lower levels, but 9 fewer dioxins. So the fingerprint of the control sample is completely different to the fingerprint of the plume impacted sulfur run. And we've laid all that out. I don't know if you've seen the community press conference. I had big charts and we explained it in a simple way. So this narrative that things are ubiquitous in the environment, the fact might be correct, but the truth is the full fingerprint of dioxins are not ubiquitous in the environment in the control samples where the plume did not impact the water or the soil.
Ansley, would you like to introduce Sam, and then we could put him on mute after that, I think. Or I mean,
Yeah.
Fidel on.
Fidel on Sam's phone in the car, I think, right now. And I apologize, someone's singing quite loudly on their guitar across the field from me. Fidel is a friend that I met last Friday. He is an award-winning Indigenous documentarist, and I can pass that. I don't know if you're able to say hi, Fidel, but he's on Sam's iPhone and he's here listening. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm muted. Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
You're
unmuted.
We can
Yes.
hear you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I apologize for my lateness. I got out of a Qigong class and realized that when later I apologize. 3 minutes for you.
We can't hear you very well. Can you put your mouth closer to the receiver?
Bluetooth. Let me just hold on 1 second.
Fidel is a advisor for the RFK Jr. Campaign, 2024 presidential campaign. And for those of you not familiar, Bobby Kennedy is an environmental litigator.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Hello.
Fidel. Welcome back. We can hear you now.
Okay, I can't hear anything. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Fidel Moreno. I'm a ethnographic documentary filmmaker. Most of my work has been on treaty rights, religious freedom rights, environmental justice, social justice. I did a film on, my latest film was on Standing Rock, and I work with a lot of young filmmakers in doing independent study and take them to environmental crisis zones and have them interview and document through video what's going on. And so that's what I do, but I work in restorative justice, 28 years, and suicide prevention in 22 years. And I'm developing the White Eagle Sanctuary Trauma Healing Center here in Wilseyville, New York. So I'm going to be working, I believe, on the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign, sometimes as a surrogate speaker. Sometimes I'm looking at right now going out to Rio Grande Valley and speaking with all the union leaders and different social justice, environmental justice, farm worker rights organizations and networks out there in June. So, but that's me. And I'm really happy and honored to be part of this call. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing the work you're doing.
Thank you, Fidel. Really appreciate having you. Would you mind muting yourself? We want to have you the opportunity to unmute yourself by your own design, but there's a little noise in the car.
Yeah. Do you mind muting me? Because
we can mute you. Yeah. Thank you. Basil, could you take care of that, bud? You're the host.
Done.
Thanks, Omi. So, Bob, did you have any words to respond to what we've heard already from Sam? And just give us some wisdom, please.
Wow, that's a tall order. I wasn't prepared to really actually speak, but I can kind of piling on with what Scott said. They have public information officers out there that are the only ones allowed to communicate. I've been to East Palestine at least 8 times. Was just recently there, and have been working with EPA Region 5 as well as the Ohio and Pennsylvania EPAs. The biggest concern that I have right now is, for those of you that have been there, is literally about every 10 minutes, a hazardous waste truck basically leaves the site. They are so concerned with the soils leaving the site. So in the Ohio direction, dirt leaves every 10 minutes. About every 30 minutes, a water truck goes the Pennsylvania way. These trucks basically roll through a hazardous waste cleanup location. The dirt, they're spending a small fortune on hauling to 5 different states. If a worker leaves the site, he has to walk through a kiddie pool and brush his shoes. That's how concerned they are with the dirt leaving this site. But if you look at East Taggart Road, which is Highway 165, that runs all the way from the derailment site through the community and off to points unknown, it's about this thick in mud falling off of those trucks. And then they take the recycled water from the wastewater treatment plant and hose the street down every 15 minutes. So it's a muddy mess of toxic soil being backwashed into the storm system that go directly to the 2 creeks of concern. It is now the last day of May. Tomorrow will be the first day of June. Neither the state of Pennsylvania, the state of Ohio, or Region 5 of the US EPA have produced a stormwater pollution prevention plan that is required by law the second they started this operation. Either they have completely ignored it because the best management practices are not in place, or they have prepared one because you can get one off the internet and change the names to protect the innocent, and they're just not implementing it. Frankly, I don't believe any of the 3 organizations in charge of this have engaged in even the most basic activities required by their own regulations to continue to protect human health and the environment. And so when Scott goes out and he starts talking about how can this be happening, if you're not even engaged into the simplest, most basic activities, and you're basically tracking that mud through town, I have the photographs to prove it. I do it every time I'm there. It's kind of pathetic. I will tell you, for the benefit of this group, just so you can understand the evil that is going on in this community, is we follow what we call the parade or the circus through town. There are 3 air quality vehicles in the United States of America that can sample air quality throughout this community. 1 is owned by the EPA and 2 are owned by private contractors. The one that was used by Texas A&M to do the initial testing was one of those 3 vehicles. Now, every 30 minutes, the trucks leave the site, they drive through town, and they follow each other in this pre-described pattern. You can find it in the information section online about air testing in East Palestine. So if you look at it and you see and you say, well, why would 3, and there's only 3 trucks in the entire United States, why would they have all 3 in East Palestine following each other? Well, because if the railroad leased the other 2 and EPA owns truck number 1, but the railroad now controls truck number 2 and truck number 3, the community groups have no access to air sampling trucks. So the railroad is actually spending money to take the equipment out of circulation to prevent any of us from actually leasing or using that to gain our own information. So all air information is now controlled by the railroad. So, I mean, you've got the stormwater issues, you've got the issues with health and safety that Scott brought up, you've got this, somebody should ask, EPA should say, well, why do you have all, they literally follow each other. Scott, if you've been on the ground, you know what I'm talking about. It's literally.
Yep. Oh, I know exactly. I saw it yesterday.
Yeah, we talk about this circus. They actually follow each other around. It's hilarious. We have it on videotape. So while they're attempting to control the narrative, they're continuing to do evil things. They're being watched, and this will all come to surface.
Bob, one thing is what I'm hearing from the team I have and is the dust we are looking for, and we don't get an answer from the EPA. They have to be testing the dust, and there are these big vacuums they can put in the air and test the dust. So they have, and then they fund all these street fairs now July 4th. But it's funny, if it's so safe there, did you see where they shut down the excavation so there was no dust in the air? So I believe they know they have a problem with the dust, and we can't get an answer from the EPA.
3 things that occur. Now the 3 trucks have equipment on them that are to prevent the dust from clogging the trucks up, and they can clean those out. And so that, however, if you go away from Taggart Road and you go 3 or 4 blocks north or 3 or 4 blocks south, they're not wetting the roads and hosing the nonsense down. So the dust is disgusting. I mean, you will consume several grams of dirt if you just walk through town because of all the truck traffic and all the excavation. That dirt is considered hazardous waste. They're actually putting, 10,000 pounds of that stuff in trucks and taking it to Texas. I mean, it's going to Indiana. It's going all over the country. And so that's the dust the community continues to breathe in. Even if it was clean dust, it's unhealthy for you to be breathing in all that dust. We have laws in this country for PM 2.5 and things like that. Dust inhaled into the lungs will, cause lesions. So just dust is bad. Dust with all the dioxin in it's a whole lot worse. So much so that they are literally placarding these vehicles as a hazardous waste and hauling them out of the state. You can't fathom that. You see Suma canisters hanging on every telephone pole in this town. Those are air canisters that are set with an orifice that when you open them, they will suck air in for a period of time based on the size of the orifice. The amount of dust that's in the air, those orifices are clogging. The data is crap because they're just not doing the basic things that they're supposed to be doing. Somebody had a question and I interrupted them. Marguerite.
No, I hear you,
or
Bob, and I
Marionette,
just-
I'm sorry. And Ashley, Ansley.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for all of the information. I would like to spend the next end of our call 25 if y'all are open to answering questions and talking about solutions. What are we here to do? What action items can we all take away and get very clear? So pass Mariette.
We
Thank you.
also have a little bit of time scheduled for Jay Kind to share with us the song. So I don't know if that's going to be at the end, but just wanted to bring that awareness.
Right. Okay, so I'll take over with that first question. Thank you all. Just get my volume up. So basically, my question is how, if there are these sort of street fairs and these types of events that are going to happen, and if there is what we would call some less than logical science going on, is there any bridge building that can be done where those who are doing the big official science would then help young people or others from the community do community science? Because in there we get, all sorts of hot button words like telemedicine and citizen science and data collection and things that help convert this from the embarrassing, long-standing state of neglect that's foisted upon most of working class America, especially in rural communities, and we don't talk about. It would give it an opportunity to make it less embarrassing. And, that's really, I think that's the best. Because most of the solutions where we actually get to the very core heart of the neglect are just too deep, painful, and traumatic to handle on the outset. So you can handle them in process from the very beginning, but to focus on them as the point of departure or conversation, it's not, in my experience, it doesn't work. So I wonder if we have that capacity for the bridge building, NSF, or USDA does great grants for gamification. There are a lot of grants out for telemedicine innovation. Again, just bringing these up because it seems like the dioxins in the land that you mentioned, that state of dioxin contamination, is a sort of baseline of, again, long-term inequality and neglect. And we still haven't remediated nor addressed that in any meaningful way at all as a society, all the way straight to DC, where, we'd much rather be involved with money back and forth and ping-ponging debt ceilings than actually doing this. So this is an uphill, and it's a historic uphill. So I'm just curious, is that something we can look at? Does anyone have that capacity, to, sort of scaffold that quickly? I don't necessarily, but, I'm curious.
I appreciate that question, Mariette, and I feel like that's the intention behind the listening party, almost. Like, to clarify one of our intentions in the next 2.5 weeks, June 17th, is to have a listening party with the residents.
It was Mariette's idea.
Yeah, I know, I was just letting everyone know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I mean,
But do you see what I'm saying? Because I want us to be really careful. Sorry, I was playing with the dog. I got stuff on my hands. But I want us to be really careful and aware of that, because like we have someone on the call who does education with young filmmakers. Like, can we find funding to help local young people film, turn into filmmakers for a day or 2 or 3? Can we coordinate that with like a July 4th kind of initiative where it's like, okay, you want to be American? Like, then actually be proactive in your community, right? Because the United States, like we devolved, we stopped doing like civics. Like we actually stopped giving people the roadmap to public engagement and empowerment, starting and stopping like somewhere in the 60s and 70s where it got too dangerous, where too many of the wrong types of people were starting to actually pick up the manuals and be like, oh, I can get elected to this. So now in this time when we have this resurgence, it's just really exciting to imagine that, this is possible, that we can just know that we have these difficulties, know that the land and the soil is all uneven and toxic, and then just start taking next steps to create the data pools that will support these people in long-term health care and soil remediation. And so could you repeat your org related to gamification? Yeah, so exactly, IDEO would be great. I'm with the Design Science Studio, which is a project at the intersection of art and science, and we're associated with the Buckminster Fuller Institute and Hab Ritual out of the Bay Area. I'm also going to be attending Games for Change as an XR artist and developing on 5 points of different like social need. And, I would love to bring this to the group. I think that like is already being done in other groups, but by fall or winter, I could bring my learnings from that group and we could try a VR piece. So large language model AI and VR are my 2 things. Yeah. So that's
just to let you know, we're moving into a connected experience VR meeting right after this with Brian Crowitz from Better Worlds as well. So we're definitely, we're looking to move by June 17th to have a VR activation, and anything that comes after that, we can circle back on that. But I really love.
Yeah. Thank you.
I really love your call to action to get some sort of citizen science activation happening. I don't know where there's funding either. That's kind of why we're all here, is like, we're all here based on passion and love and desire to transform. It sounds like Scott is looking for funding because he's got a medical testing, with UCSD to get real results for people on the ground. So that's one funding bucket that's up there out of request. I'm not sure about Bob, whether or not, how you're funded with your activities in East Palestine, but funding's a great question, and we're all trying to figure that out right now. Is Scott, could you tell us a little bit about your fundraising needs to get medical testing?
First of all, the funding for me traveling and I need $0 for that. I'm going to continue that. The funding necessary is Dr. Beatrice Gullum that reached out to me. She's trying to get an NIH grant, but there's a lot of politics in play with that. And there is a way to fund her, the blood study. The residents desperately need help because the EPA, although I understand they have the power to do it in the health assessment, they're not doing it because they say there's nothing to see here, despite all the symptoms. The best way, from what I'm seeing, to help the community is to fund the expert doctor that helped the Gulf War vets, because we never really had a burn pit in the United States like the Iraq War until East Palestine, to a large degree. So if she can get the bloods and the PR people calling all the shots now, the 4 Ds of PR is delay, deny, discredit, and dismiss. Those are really playing out. And the PR people calling all the shots know that if they can, push this down the road and prevent the blood study, once people start getting cancer in 5 or 7 years, they'll be able to, the railroad will be able to say, well, you smoked a cigarette when you were in college and that's where you got the dioxins. That's literally their playbook. So that funding is not going to pay people's salaries. It's going right to Dr. Gollum, who is the world's leading expert on this stuff. And they've already started to get things set up where they can go into a lab in East Palestine and have their blood drawn.
Share a link to that crowdfunding or that call for funding in our chat. Is that possible?
Yeah, let me try to do that in the chat. Yeah, it's on the press release that I sent, but I'm going to share the link right now.
Thank you. Fidel, I see you back on. Do you know how to unmute yourself? Do you have something to say? Basil, could you unmute Sam, please? Or make me a co-host, that would work as well.
I'm asking him. He's not.
Oh, he looks like he's trying to unmute. And Better Worlds 1 is the host. I don't know if Better Worlds 2 is the host.
Both are. But,
there we go. There we go. Please.
Next week. So has there been any contact or connection with Doctors Without Borders? I mean, they seem to always secure funding, and I'm just wondering if a collaboration with an organization that already provides, human medical services, resources like that, would provide or share some resources for the victims, treatment of the victims, or diagnosis of the victims, or lab testing of the victims of this spill. Do you hear me?
Yes, we heard you. I think that's a wonderful idea. I don't think that has been done.
Because I want to believe that. Has anyone contacted the Red Cross? I mean, sometimes these organizations have funding streams or resources that they will share, especially with something like this. I mean, this is a very serious, human, need right now for these people. How many people are involved have been affected by this spill? I'm sorry, I'm ignorant about this. I haven't read up too much on it.
Scott and Bob, I think, would have the information on that. How many people are affected by this spill or by this dust and the plume?
Well, it's expanding. It's way beyond East Palestine. It's Negley, it's surrounding communities. And I've got information now that suggests that there's a dioxin plume moving around and getting into people's well water. It goes into Pennsylvania. So I don't have
horrible.
I don't know if Bob has a feel for it, but it's significant.
It's right around 10 to 12,000 people.
So there was
Go ahead.
No, I was just clarifying another ask of yours, Fidel. Was the Red Cross at all involved in any of the relief efforts or other organizations where there might be funding? I think that's what you said, right, Fidel?
Correct. Yes.
No, I think what happened was when you had the US EPA issue that cleanup and abatement order in like February 21st. Once that occurs, the world changes. They lawyer up, they get their consultants, everybody starts. I kid you not, I've been fighting for the SWIP for about 2 months now. And EPA says, I'll figure it out. I'll find out who's got it. That went on for about 3 weeks. And then they said, well, it's Ohio EPA. Ohio EPA says, well, we can't find it. It's US EPA. And I still don't have it. We're talking 60 days. And it's one of those kinds of things where once they issued that cleanup and abatement order, they're claiming right now 387 million has been spent on the cleanup. it's probably going to exceed $1 billion by the time they're done. I mean, it's rapidly, they're a third of the way there now. And so if they would, I'm about common sense and simplicity and approaching it from a very, very, direct way with the community. If they would have allowed this community, if they'd have given this community a fraction, 387 million have already been spent. I mean, if they'd have given them $5 million and said, do your own community outreach and your own testing and your own medical, they'd be done. They'd be done with that part of that. They've spent $387 million making a bad situation worse.
Ryan, do you have a question?
I have a lot of questions. This is a very intriguing discussion, and I really appreciate the perspectives. There's a lot of courage in this space, and yeah, I'm curious. Like funding seems to be the issue that we keep coming back to. How to get funding for blood tests so that people can be relocated as a start, and then from there, what are the next options? And people that are on the ground, making sure that these goals align with their needs, and just clarifying that. And I see Mr. Eisenstein has just joined the conversation, and yeah, I'll yield those questions.
Hey everybody, I'm sorry I was late, but I'm listening now.
No worries, Charles. You missed a little bit of conversing about this big topic to unpack, and but we're hearing from community members right now about what's going on the ground there. Ellie, did you have a question? Or Ryan? Ryan's asked about funding and about how the streams of funding, how they're unlocked. Is it true, either Bob or Scott, whether or not, does a state of emergency need to be declared in order for people to get relocation funding taken care of? How does this work?
Yeah, there's a big issue about that relocation funding, but it's my understanding Governor DeWine has to do that, and I don't think he's going to do that. And to go to Bob's point, if you look at these homes, they could literally, once the PR people and the contractors get a hold of this, they're incented to make all the money and drag this out. But what the railroad really doesn't understand, they could probably spend 70% less and suffer much less reputational damage just by going in and offering people, oh, your house is appraised for 100,000, here's 200,000, we'll move you. But this becomes this cycle where the PR people take control and the residents gets no help. I mean, it defies all logic. It really does.
It's not the PR people, it's the lawyers. If they make that gesture, then the lawyers are going to be like, well, you're admitting your guilt that way, and then you'll be open to civil lawsuits that will destroy you. That's probably my guess why they're not making any gesture like that.
Good point.
They could always settle saying they admit no liability, and they're just I would think they could work that out.
Mike DeWine's argument is that he doesn't want to pay for it as the state of Ohio, and then doesn't want the federal government to pay for it. He wants the train to pay for it, the Norfolk Southern, and that's why he's going on the record, at least in certain periodicals, saying that he doesn't want to call a state of emergency because of that fact. Ellie, what's on your mind?
So I see this error pattern a lot, right? I work more than I'd like to with the federal government, and basically, and just any large organization, like chains of knowledge and operations are broken. People do not have the right information to act in many cases. I would guess that's what's behind what Bob Bowcock has kind of lined out, right? The lack of plans, the lack of sensible execution in response to this. Probably there isn't leadership from the top to actually do things the right way. Probably nobody actually knows what that would be. So it seems to me that what would need to be proposed as some kind of alternative to management, right? Like obviously PR doesn't solve the fact that there's vinyl chloride in the soil and in people's bloodstreams. We need to do real things on the ground, but it doesn't seem like there is leadership in that space. So, my thought is if we were actually able to develop a plan, right? I mean, I think Marriott Papich had a good point about some things that could be included in that plan. Again, very difficult to create without funding, but a plan could be created. And then that could be perhaps taken to Norfolk Southern or whoever it is who's on the line for the next 2/3 of $1 billion that hasn't actually been spent yet. Maybe the way to get funding is to try to pursue to reduce the exposure of this continuing on in the way that it currently is, right? Not being solved, a lot of problems, embarrassments, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the action plan. We could execute it, blah, blah, blah. It costs us much money.
If I may jump in there, I think that was the question I asked last week with Ryan of like, would anti-toxicity kits help? Like, what if we put together a conglomerate of ideas of how to get something to these residents so that they can start the process of healing? And that was a question that I had posed in the chat as well. And I know Echo's hand is up as well.
Echo?
Well, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that before I had my own question. I thought that was a valid question if anyone wanted to respond to that first. Either Ben or Scott or Charles.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know which question, but I think Ansley, like that idea, that kind of idea, we have a lot of small ones, and it kind of just needs to be structured into something that someone could look through and go, oh yeah, great, this is what I buy to actually solve the East Palestine train derailment disaster. That's a plan that I could put together if we had the inputs from everyone. What I would wonder about is who to take that to. Bob, do you know who would be the right funder to approach with that?
I'd have to think about it because there's a number of different programs you could run. There almost needs to be, I mean, what we're seeing almost with all these train derailments, I'm headed down to Florida to a municipal recycling facility that burned for 10 days. A lot of plastics that got burned. It's the same dioxins. We're starting to see a resurgence of this Superfund. And you're going to start to see more and more of that type of thing. There almost needs to be within Superfund, there is an office of community advocacy, somebody that advocates for the community separate and apart from, it's funded by the Superfund program, it's funded by EPA, it's funded by EPA collecting the money back from Norfolk Southern, and it's an advocate for the community. Right now, it seems like every direction we turn, that even a simple question's taken as an offense to the government. I don't care whether it's a Republican or a Democrat or who the hell's in the administration at the time. You ask a question, you're immediately offending. I will tell you, Superfund and EPA has been jacked up ever since it was founded. Back in the 70s, all administrations have failed us, and it comes down to simple questions. Who's controlling it? Well, I'll tell you who's controlling it. The consulting engineering groups are the ones that are consulting it. There are 9 out there on this site right now making a ton of money. I mean, we used to joke about, the Navy ashtray that cost $8,000. How much do you think they're paying for a truckload of hazardous waste that's leaving that site right now? It adds up really fast. It is the most graft, corruption-ridden process in North America today. And I don't care whether it's Biden or Bush. I'm not even going to say the other name, but it doesn't matter who it is. Those administrations are literally allowing for ridiculously inflated costs for recovery, and Wall Street's making all the money. And it comes down to that. It's literally, I guarantee some of the consulting engineering firms that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange that are working in East Palestine are on the board of directors of Norfolk Southern Railroad.
I love what you're saying, Bob, and I also want to be mindful of our time.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I so appreciate it, really, and that's why we're here. You know, community gathering to be like, let's find another way. So thank you.
Does everybody have 15 more minutes just to continue to unpack? I mean, the idea of a plan is a big idea, and I really love Ellie for being ambitious and bringing that up. Ansley, I really like your idea of a smaller subset of the plan, the impact of individual health and antitoxins and natural remedies and stuff. If everybody has 15 more minutes, and then we could phase out at the end if DJ J Kind is there with the music. And some of us will be moving into the virtual reality space called the connected experience to see about how we could potentially take a little bit of this ecological knowledge and Google Maps and a few other tools and create an experience in virtual reality where people could be educated and we could party in an experience in VR on top of what would be a toxic site if we went to it in person. So does that work for everybody?
I do need to jump off soon.
You jump off soon?
Yeah, but I do have a sample of the music I've been working on. It's just an instrumental. It's not going to come over very well, but what I can do here is put a link to it. I uploaded it to my SoundCloud.
Thank you.
So in the chat there, you can take a listen. But I could play it over here as well. I just don't know how well it'll come out.
Well, you know how to use the Zoom settings so that the audio is optimized? So they use under settings, under audio, to make sure you use the full audio rather than the mic audio. Just make sure to do that before you stream your audio. I have a question at some point. I'd love to hear Charles's comment in the thread.
Please, Echo. Well, this is figured. Well, Jay Kind's figuring it out. Tell us your question.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate Scott. Just wanted to say I've been watching so many of your interviews, and thank you so much for just being so clearly a voice for the people on the ground. Aaron Brockovich was right there in the beginning. I mean, we're facing the unthinkable, and since Charles is here, and as somebody who kind of helps us, awaken the possible within, and that the future is an inside job. If we just sort of imagine for a moment a whole different approach to this, where citizen scientist journalist is needed around so many of these sites, and of course the plausible deniability of what are the allowable amounts being changed, I think right before in January or something, right before this incident occurred, as well as the digital ID wearables that maybe were rolled out in Palestine. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Scott and Ben, anyone on the ground, about whether you know anyone wearing these digital IDs, apparently giving people biometrics, and is that data available? Can we FOIA it? Can we somehow get access to that metrics, and can we replace it? Can we make the system obsolete? Can we imagine a system where, and this is where I'd love to hear Charles's thoughts, where every time there's a massacre, instead of just a virtual, like a potential, something that people from the outside could see as being co-opted or whatever, but the sincere intention that I know everyone here brings. It's great to see Brother Fidel and Mariette and Kirill and John and so many other beautiful souls here, who would like to process the grief and transform and transmute the unthinkable reality of these chemical spills, these factories burning, and it's unprecedented amounts. It's all over. We need new grids that show us where there's any water we can drink and play in safely, and any other accounts, again, from Scott or Ben, around actual incidents on the ground of birds falling from the sky or fish, or whether that's gotten better. Thank you so much again for all your work, and any way we can support you, especially with a whole different approach to all of this, outside of being scarce funding. And I'll put some links there for funding sources. Several good suggestions there already. Thank you. Thanks again.
Well, a couple things. I know there's been a lot of talk about the bracelets, and I've been working with Dr. Gullum to try to get some and hand them out in the community. People may be wearing these bracelets that monitor your environmental exposure. I don't know the extent of how much detail they can provide. Maybe Bob knows something about that. I also know that wildlife have foxes, and some livestock are starting to have some deformities. I haven't seen it with my own eyes. I don't know the extent of it. But in my experience, most of the people I'm listening to on the ground, almost all of them, I have no reason to believe that they're not telling the truth at all. I think that there is a lot of concern about that. And also, snakes disappearing, no more chipmunks, and some of the pictures I've seen, there is a need for necropsies of a lot of this, dead wildlife, and trying to figure out what went on. But I don't know where those specialists are and who can do that and what the cost is, because this is almost like a crime, what is a crime, and it's a murder, and there's all this evidence out there, and it's figuring out how to put all the evidence together in a way that's going to hold up in court for this community.
Quite frankly, I'm more concerned with the long-term effects as opposed to, I don't know that there's been genetic mutations that could happen that fast. So I wouldn't, I would really look at that with a critical eye. You remember, the California condor, what knocked it on the endangered species list? Dioxins. Okay, that happened for 40 years for us to recover from. It's the long-term effects of what's happened here that are of more of a concern. So, I think science is going to drive us towards different types of consumer sensing devices. The most powerful weapon I think that's been devised in the last 50 years is this little boy here. The consumer is rapidly becoming the regulator. There are apps out there that stuff is reported faster than lickety split. And I see that evolving even at a more rapid rate. I see consumer products available. I see air filters in homes. I see air filters in hot water heaters. I see air filters in ice machines, the ones in your refrigerator and your door, that, LG is actually putting a water quality device in their refrigerators. That information is available on an app on your phone for the consumer, and it's aggregated and can tell water quality events across the United States based on what the heck's going in an LG refrigerator. Today's 2023. What's going to happen by 2028? The consumer is the regulator. It takes the EPA 25 years. Somebody said Aaron's name recently. Aaron, hexavalent chromium. Do you know it's been law in the state of California, signed by the governor 26 years ago, that within 2 years, California would adopt a drinking water regulation for hexavalent chromium. 26 years later, they still haven't adopted it in the great state of California. There is not a maximum contaminant level for hexavalent chromium in drinking water. The most prolific chemical used and discharged into the waters of the United States, and there's still not a regulation for it. So it ain't going to happen with our government. The consumer is the regulator.
That harkens back to what Mariette was saying about citizen science and really inspiring grassroots action. Ryan, you have a question?
So the research that's emerging on things like biochar and mycofiltration are outpacing government policy. And this has been maybe the norm for the past 10 years. And maybe this is the norm of government in technology in general, that government can't keep up with it. And I think Bob, and Scott both, what you're saying is we need people like Charles, Mr. Eisenstein, that have connections into the public sphere, that can bring attention to these issues, and pull in more attention. I'm from Flint, Michigan. People are still toxified there. If you go to any inner city, East Palestine is a flashpoint of water quality. I'm sitting on the south shore of Lake Superior. We have 25% of the world's fresh water here. The world's coming here, to the Great Lakes. And I think that we have to solve this issue wherever water is bubbling up. And that's why I'm involved, because I see East Palestine as the most recent, contemporary issue. I've been in Florida for, a decade. I know the water quality issues there. I see the red tide. I've seen the piles of fish. We have the solutions. We have the understanding of the logic of how to get to the solution. We don't have the motor beyond the spiritual energy to push us there. But Mr. Eisenstein, straight up, people like Aubrey Marcus and Dr. Zach Bush and Joe Rogan, we need, and Dave Chappelle and Paul Stamets, we need that attention of people in a cohesive message that have a clear solution and your guidance, and everybody that's involved in this group, including celebrities, because it's all of our networks that we can pull in people that can pay for. What's a blood test going to cost? $25 a pop? How many people are there? And I don't want to belabor this, and I don't want to drag this out, because I think we know, but I appreciate everybody being a part of this conversation. And this is an opportunity to hold a corporation accountable using public pressure and having a clear solution-oriented pathway. That's it. That's all. With those three pieces, I feel like if we can get those together, with the leadership of just, Conard and folks on the ground, Bob and Scott, and this is doable. And Charles, I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on a pathway forward, honestly, because we've got the public eye.
Wow. Yeah, I've just been absorbing as fast as I can everything that's been said here. I ran into a woman a few weeks ago who was a refugee from East Palestine. And, the usual story, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. She started having like these nosebleeds that wouldn't stop, went to the doctor. He said it's allergies, it has nothing to do with the chemical spill, et cetera, and just got stonewalled everywhere and eventually left. Had to leave the area, leave her organic farm and the entire ecological farm and community that she'd built. It was really sad. And like these voices are not, there's a huge disconnect, and not just, this is just one example of the disconnect between the people and the government. We're supposedly in a democracy, but it's right now has become pretty much a democracy in name only. And that's why like these incredible grassroots, not only the grassroots experiences, but also the solutions. Like you mentioned, when you mentioned biochar and microremediation, generally speaking, none of our ecological problems are actually that difficult to solve, but the solutions are not coming from government. And, honestly, I'm working with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. now, on his presidential campaign, but, he genuinely does care about this kind of issue. And I'm not saying that if he becomes president, that it won't be a turning point, but a lot more has to happen than that. That said, this is the kind of issue that he really cares about. His career was spent as an environmental lawyer fighting pollution in the Hudson River, and other he's not a climate change activist. This is the kind of the pollution in the water. This is the kind of stuff that impacts people's lives directly. Personally, I've written a lot about this topic. I think that if there is one global substance that we should be focusing our energy on, it's not CO2, it should be water. Because water is, as they say at Standing Rock, is life. And ultimately, water is it's like water in our human bodies. It's the body of Earth can only be healthy and even have a healthy climate when its waters are healthy. So that's more of a philosophical level. Right now, I'm just taking in the information and also thinking, okay, practically, how can I help? My go-to solution is, well, I'll write something about it. And that brings some attention to it, but there needs to be an action step for that attention. And then also, I'm working with Mr. Kennedy, and I know that he would care about this. I know he does care about it. We could tweet about it or something. But again,
one thing this community is looking to have is by Mariette Papek brought it up the other day, for us to do on Zoom a listening party to people on the ground on June 17th, the morning. And we'd love to have Bobby there and you and Fidel there, just really listening to people, boots on the ground, what's going on, how difficult is this issue? And instead of, a platform where we have to speak, we're just going to listen to people and their difficulties, because at this stage, there's a million ways we could go with potential solutions, but without funding, the empathy, the feeling, the getting the grief, getting compassionately the issues on the ground seems to be the best step we could take as an unfunded collective of people who care.
That's a brilliant thing to do, because the frustration in the community is the government, the EPA, no one's listening to them. They just get dismissed. And that would, to allow the community to speak freely and be listened to could cause a lot of action. They need that because they're not being listened to by the people that should be listening.
Yeah, that's a great idea. The June 17th, is that the
That's the date, 10 a.m. Pacific. I mean, 10 a.m. Eastern to 2 p.m. And then in the evening, we're going to move into a VR experience, like kind of dance on top of train cars that fell over to give people an opportunity to be educated about the issue. Because there's just, it's hard to understand for people who aren't eco geeks like us. So we want to create this feedback loop of celebration, cultural movers to shakers in an environment that's immersive that can educate them to be like, oh no, this is a huge problem. Why is anyone covering this up? That's just not cool.
Yeah.
One of the things that the government does respond to masses come together on Twitter. And one of the things would be to have all of us chip in on our social media and take segments and tweet and put it all over Facebook, because that might get some action. The government does not like all of us coming together and helping the community get a voice. I think that if we plan this out and we all help the best way possible, we could really help put pressure on the CDC and the EPA.
Would be fun if those of us, especially with bigger names, could show up on site. But I just don't know how dangerous it is, Scott and Bob. And then we'll move over to Ellie and Charles next. I don't want to take the floor too much, but Scott and Bob, is it dangerous if we show up there with an AV setup and a truck and just to listen to people?
I think if you're there, I mean, every time I'm there, I get some symptoms. They go away in 48 hours. And I think if you're in and out, I don't think it's that dangerous to show up. It's the living there day in and day out and the nonstop exposure that I think can cause the serious issues. I don't know what Bob's take on it is.
Well, it depends. I get this question all the time when I'm making presentations, and there's a lot of truth in it. It depends on your own personal health as it exists today. And quite frankly, how much gray do you got? Because, I'm not worried about, what my health effects are going to be over the next few years. But the rest of you, anybody under 50, I'd caution you to even be in town. Like I said, we talked about the dust. Okay, that dust has dioxin in it. Okay, the other thing that people don't realize on this particular cleanup site is they have over excavated far beyond the spill site to where, I'm convinced that in that particular stretch of railway, it was probably pre-contaminated before the train ever crashed because of what they're removing from there. And they're being very secretive about it. They've got more security guards than they do cleanup people. There's a lot going on in that community. And so to answer your question, I'd probably do it outside of town. And they're willing to travel. I've done events over in Beaver, Pennsylvania. I've done events, a 30-mile radius, they'll come. I would get a little closer to town, but it's one of those kinds of situations where even, being there last week, I'm still concerned about that. People don't like to hear it, but you eat a gram of dirt every day, regardless what you do. You don't want to be inhaling dirt that, likely has high levels of dioxin in it.
Rock on with that. Ellie, questions?
Yeah, so just thinking about sort of, for everyone to think about what this is. I mean, to me, it seems like we need to write a grant proposal for the project plan of responding to East Palestine. The only problem is that there's no actual funder that's asking for this grant, right? We have to then find it. But I think that in terms of, being able to illustrate what the problems are, there's, obviously there's things that are happening on the ground. There's things that need to happen on the ground, which are not happening. Bob has mentioned some of those, so has Scott. There's also, the costs that Charles mentioned. We could begin to try to estimate out what this is going to be, especially long-term. And then we can also produce a number of possible solutions, right? I don't think we actually can say we absolutely know how to solve this right now. I think we need to say, this is what it looks like. If you give us funding, we are a team of people with these skills who are interested to go in and actually assess this. And here's the kinds of things that we could offer. So, I'm a grant writer. I'm happy to put this together. If everyone could sort of email me like what they think about, so I know Ryan is like a microremediation guy and Mariette is LLMs and VR, if you just have like a little bit of a blurb about what your capacity is to contribute, and any specific ideas you have, like Ainsley mentioned, the blood kits or toxicity kits, just email me that. I'll put my email in the chat and we can round that all up and, make a document that people like Charles can take out and try to fundraise for.
Thank you, Ellie.
Love
I
that.
think that's a great idea. Yeah, environmental justice activist.
I think
Charles.
it's more environmental operations, right? Like we have to kind of move beyond the whole point of thinking that this is a narrative problem, because it's not. It's literally, you need hands in the dirt, you need people doing stuff. It needs to be connected to what's wrong. We need scientists, we need data. Like it's not political, right? Like nobody should disagree that we want the environment in the United States to be healthy. So, I am very resistant to this justice because it's not about who's winning. It's about literally being alive and being safe.
Charles, did you have a response to that, or did you have your own question?
Well, it's more of a thought. Just thinking about perhaps non-traditional and maybe more immediate funding sources. Who are the other stakeholders who are trapped in this one way or another? Right? Like what I'm thinking about is health insurance companies, right? They're literally going to have to pay for like any of their policyholders in the area. They're going to have to pay. I'm sure that there's someone, some actuary expert who's like, well, whoa, this actually might be a super expensive problem for us. If someone were to go to these insurance companies, be like, yo, how about an independent research? Because you're going to want to know, your shareholders are going to want to know, your risk officers are going to want to know what this is going to cost. So why don't you hand us $50,000, $100,000? We're going to do some on the ground kind of stuff. That's one idea. I'm also thinking about like agricultural or industrial associations. What happens when these chemicals end up in the food in the food source, right? That becomes liability. There are other stakeholders in this that are already stuck in this. I don't know if there may be a creative opportunity to kind of quietly, like, I wouldn't recommend, doing a big press blow up about this, but be like, I'm sure someone in your organization and your stakeholdership would be interested to know the answer to these questions. Why don't we get you an inexpensive initial pass of what this might mean to you from a risk and cost standpoint? Just kind of throwing out ideas here.
I like that. Bob and Scott, are there any stakeholders you could think of that would be impacted? I like the health insurance one, or if anybody else has wisdom, it doesn't need to just be for Bob and Scott.
I like to be a positive person, so I won't tell you that when I turn on the news tonight that I'm going to watch 16 cancer drug commercials. So, Charles, it's part of the business plan. Sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. What do you mean by that? I mean, I understand. I mean, like, I think we all understand that.
We've been killing ourselves with cancer. It's part of the business plan, and the actuaries are kind of in on it.
Right, but
yeah.
aren't we expecting short, medium, and long-term detrimental health effects that are going to be sort of outliers on actuary tables and
Sure.
Potential?
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, the bigger group that's out there, that I'm most familiar with, that actually does honest studies of epidemiology, like Kaiser Permanente.
That seems like a solid. Yeah, that seems like a solid option right there.
So Kirill mentions I don't know if you wanted to speak your question, but something about local hospitals taking in patients with clear symptoms. Any reports from them? That seems to be a Scott question, because Scott, you seem to be the most connected to people with medical symptoms, correct?
Yeah, but a lot of the doctors in the surrounding community I don't want to use the word threat. They're being intimidated and things are shut down and residents can't get testing. So unfortunately, what keeps getting reinforced is you cannot underestimate the undue influence of the railroad and the power they have. And state and federal agencies are controlled by them. It's just the reality we face. But with that being said, I'm optimistic with things like this and growing awareness. And like Bob Bowcock says, the the power of this in social media. That's why the government fears social media, because if we get millions of people calling this out, that's what's going to change things.
I don't know whether you guys heard. You can Google it. There's news. There was actually a follow-up report that was issued, I think, just last week, a news report. Because of the East Palestine situation, Aaron Brockovich was put on the domestic terrorist list by Homeland Security.
Whoa!
Google it. Google it. It's a fact. It was reported. Probably about 8 weeks ago. There was a follow-up story last week. So that's what you're playing with here, guys.
Some of us have spent some time in one police plaza due to our experience at Occupy Wall Street a decade ago. So, but not all of us are down.
Am I looking at the do not fly list here?
I mean, so realistically, what would it cost to actually do cleanup?
That's kind of an open-ended question. I mean, it really needs a definition. One of the stories that I cite, and I don't know whether I did this, John, or not when we spoke, but I'll go over it very, very quickly here for the essence of time. But one rail car, Lehigh Railroad in upstate New York, the cleanup and abatement plan isn't due till August 2024. That train flipped in 1971. One rail car full of it, and the vinyl chloride's still in the groundwater table as we sit here today. So it's Leroy, New York. Google it, Leroy, New York. Go on the EPA website. Look at when the final remediation plan is due, August 2024. Train flipped in 1971. They did a cleanup in 1990s. I found all the barrels in the bushes. It's a mess, and that's what we're dealing with here. So to answer your question, in all fairness, is I really don't have an answer. It's weird. They are digging ridiculously deep in that rail yard right now, even though they have 50 security guards and Barney Fife controlling the situation out there. They literally, you can get around their defenses, and I've seen the holes they're digging. I've got photographs. It's pretty rough out there. I don't know what they're after. They're not telling anybody, but they've dug, a few underground garage levels deep. They've gone down, 100 feet deep in some spots, and I don't know what they're chasing. They're not being straightforward with it. If you go on, they have all these websites. They haven't been updated in weeks.
But you've estimated that there's going to be maybe another 2/3 of $1 billion spent on the cleanup that you're seeing. What would doing it right? Like, obviously this is ballpark figures and sort of off the cuff, right? But like, is doing it right $500 million? Is it a couple $1 million? Like, what are we looking at?
It could have been done for 500 million or 5 billion. I don't know. I don't know what they're after. They're not telling us what they're after. For the benefit of this group, they are talking about literally on those same tracks, putting the hazardous waste in train cars destined for the state of Oregon, of all states. That's a plan right now. They're shipping that stuff to Oregon, to a hazardous waste landfill there by rail. The transportation laws limit the amount that can go down the highways. Okay, so they usually weigh out before they load out, which means that they exceed the weight limitations. So they're actually talking about a rail car is 144,000 pounds. Okay, they're talking about rail hauling that dirt out. That scares me. They're not doing it today, but if they start doing that, are they going to the Earth's core? We don't know. That's why I can't give you an honest answer. I just.
And is that the EPA or is that Norfolk Southern? Like, who is?
Well, it's Norfolk Southern's consultants.
Okay.
Okay, and they're all in bed with each other. I mean, there's Arcadis wrote the initial plan. AECOM's out there. I mean, they've got Clearwater. They've got them all. They're all out there. Everybody's getting a piece of the pie, and those are the same consultants the EPA hires. It's a very small club. So what ultimately is going to happen? I can't even put it. If it all comes down to blowing up those 5 cars. I mean, that was FUBAR.
Who made that decision?
Nobody knows. No,
Was
well,
it the Ohio State National Guard was referenced in one article I read?
that's the one. That's the only one that I've heard, and I heard that from directly from the mayor, where he literally said, "I was in the room, and the Ohio National Guard made the decision." Now it's being reported he did it, no, she did it, no, he did it, they did it. I don't know who did it. We're not going to say who did it, but I heard that within 72 hours from the mayor. So usually your quickest piece of information from somebody who hasn't been brought into the camel's tent doesn't necessarily lie. And so I believe the mayor. It was probably the guard. So, but that's a whole nother area of a mess. You know, there are 6 safety devices on a rail car that failed before they had to blow them up. 6. So you know that the air relief valves on the top gummed up because they put plasticizer in the vinyl chloride. Why'd they do that? Who did that? What, you know, is that normal? No. They have heat plugs, lead heat plugs that are designed, lead melts at a low temperature. So the lead's supposed to melt that out during a fire before it can explode. I mean, all these things failed. And it's kind of like, and then they decided to dig a hole. Yeah. So I don't know. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I don't have all the answers. And I know they're hiding something.
Yeah, Ellie, what comes up for me with your solutions digging, it kind of seems funny because our 3rd episode, I remember you asking the question of what should we back up from? What should we watch out for? And Daniel referenced jumping to solutions. And that really stuck with me because, you know, I mean, the listening party seems like the most exciting opportunity because what I'm hearing from Scott's report, from the reporting coming through Scott, is people are asking for a state of emergency so they can unlock funding so they get the hell out of town, and medical tests to see if they're sick. That to me seems like the most important thing to concentrate on, rather than as much as cool as mushrooms eating pollution are, which I love. That's what started this initiative. If people are suffering on the ground and peeing out vinyl chloride, let's get them the hell out of town.
Exactly.
Why isn't it possible to write 2 things in a proposal?
Okay, I get what you're saying. It's just for me. I'm not saying no. I'm just giving my opinion. You know what I mean? And I feel more aligned. Sorry, somebody's echoed. I feel more aligned with the idea of getting people taken care of first and then assessing the environmental issue. That's all, from a phased perspective.
From my experience, you know, every stakeholder has their own goal. So if you approach the healthcare insurance people and try to get funding, they'll be concerned about the human, you know, health impact. If you approach an environmental funder, they'll be concerned about the condor or whatever, right? So, you know, it always depends on who you're trying to take this to. But I think from my perspective, you know, if I'm going to write something, it's going to be once. So, you know, I can write that in whatever way people want. But in my experience, one of the reasons that we're seeing this kind of debacle in response is that nobody actually knows what to do. So if we don't have a voice to articulate what should be done, how can anything be different?
And I don't want to take everybody's time. I know we're getting late. For me, it's a competence issue. I'm not boots in the ground. I don't have the competence. Scott and Bob have the most competence of anyone of what's going on the ground on this call. And I know Scott's calling for medical tests and you know, money for medical tests to check in on people. As far as the environmental stuff, it seems like they have a closed door plan that we're not privy to at this stage. So I wouldn't know how to create a plan that's better than the closed door plan if I don't have access to it.
Yeah, I think we need to say that there needs to be a plan.
Sure.
And then someone needs to fund that, and then someone who can actually build that plan, right? Like an academic, for example. But I mean, you know, we can obviously argue about like which side or what to do, and you know, you don't have to take what I'm thinking of, but you know, for just like some context, I mentioned that I'm writing a grant to, you know, put together some kind of knowledge network for water systems in the US. And there are other academics who are competing against me in this requisition who are going to be talking about the East Palestine event, and they're building some kind of tool to connect to that. But you don't know who they are, and they don't know who to talk to. And so they're just building something because they can get money for that. It sounds good. It's been in the papers. It's not connected to anything. If we actually want to find everyone in the world that's like concerned about this and organize them, there has to be a plan, right? There has to be sort of like a central space where it's like, we have some answers. This is what it can look like. Do the piece of it that that you can see, or reframe it if this is wrong, right? But we can obviously indicate that there's going to be wildlife impacts, there's going to be human health impacts, there's going to be environmental impacts for water, and we can outline that and give people a structure to kind of have a conversation about this. If we can't rely on the government and our experts to be doing this work, and we have to shift to communities, this is it.
Ryan, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, John. I think I agree 100% with you, Ellie. And I think we need a plan that first puts the folks on the ground in East Palestine on the pedestal and articulates their needs clearly. And then we can, from there, break down support logics and for each of their different goals. And obviously that's extraction, that's blood testing, and that's getting the hell out of there first. And I can tell you this with confidence. I work with consultants in the Pacific Northwest who have remediated dioxins using plants and fungi. This is 100% possible. It actually happens. Mother Nature can solve the dioxin and the vinyl chloride issue and the PFAS issue and all of the other toxins. That is not a problem. That takes long-term planning and a lot of testing, which I'm sure a lot of folks know. But first and foremost, we have to get the hearts and minds of people in East Palestine on board and bought in, because their reality is being transformed based on their needs that are articulated. And that's, like, in my mind, first and foremost, where this has to start. It doesn't matter how many celebrities and anything else. It's going to be colonizer mentality. If people just come in from the outside and say, hey, this is what you need, we first have to say, this is what they say they need. We're going to go find that with the support of celebrity and anybody else, first. From there, we have all of the talent, from AI to music to fungi to whatever. We have that talent right now in the network. We just have to first get that flashpoint hit on, get them blood testing, get people the heck out of ground zero. Like, people didn't stay around when the buildings fell in 9/11. People got the hell out of there. We got to get people the hell out of there first and foremost. That's number one. Nothing else matters unless we do that first.
Great point. Great point.
So I'm cognizant of time. I did want to check in with Bob. I don't know if this is the right venue to talk about the DPES tool, the watershed, the water mapping, point source mapping tool from the EPA, whether you think that would be a solution or not. We've been evolving this since our episode, and some of us are aligning with what Scott's saying. So, but this, if there's something that could be wrapped into Ellie's desire for solutions, would a crack team that's analyzing the point source water flow be of value in assessing who's at fault or anything like that?
It's been 30 plus years since that software was built out, and commercialized organizations have made added bells and whistles to a very old platform. I think that if Ellie wants to get into grant writing for something like that, to where it's weird, you would almost be grant writing. We'd have to noodle on it a little bit, because you'd be grant writing for the benefit of the EPA. They do most of their work out of Cincinnati. That's where all their field offices are and everything like that. That's where the hydraulic modeling software, that's where the source water protection plan software, all that software was developed out of Cincinnati. And maybe we find a commercial operation that would be willing to do it, to work with EPA to get it done. But if we get that up to speed, you can use, you hear Scott talk all the time. I mean, we know a PFAS sample costs you $850. All these different things that are on out there, it gets very, very expensive very, very quickly. But because of what we've learned, there are surrogate constituents within water that are like the canary in the coal mine. if the TDS changes, if the total organic carbon changes, if you monitor, turbidity, temperature, pH, simple things like that, the software can say, last time I saw this pH change with this organic carbon change, with this TDS change, it meant that. And it's the AI of water quality monitoring that we need to take 35-year-old software with and throw the AI spin on. And all of a sudden, $50 million worth of analytical work, it doesn't be required, and the computer can tell you the answers within 15 seconds. So, I mean, when I worked on the original hydraulic modeling software, H2O.NET, which is a EPA software program, you used to hit a simple query of what's the chlorine residual going to be on the other side of this reservoir, and you'd hit start and you'd come in the next morning and you might have an answer. It took that long for the software just to generate an answer. Now, back to the LG thing, there's all these data points out there and nobody knows what to do with them. An ice maker could actually tell somebody upstream, this is what happened 3 days ago. So that's a beneficial software change, and something that the consumer can help the government actually do. If we wait for the government, we're going to wait forever.
Yeah, no question on that.
John, I know we've been on the call a while, but I want to make one for those
please
remediation. Please reach out to me, because I totally separate. I have a business in environmental remediation. I was one out of 1,000,002 ideas, one of 40 technology approved by the Gulf of Mexico. And I've spoken recently at the Chevron and California EPA. No one's been adopted. Contractors, HEPACO, Clean Harbors, Waste Management. They're still using rotary phones. This remediation in industry is the most corrupt going. None of the technologies have been adopted. Biochar, I use. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Are deployed rapidly, could have stopped the spread. Once the spread happens at East Palestine area, there's nothing you can do. But there's opportunity for this group to collaborate on remediate. You need the remediation technologies in place and required. But the problem with this industry is it's all controlled by the contractors, and whether it's technologies I've used, and there's 40 of us from the Gulf that are not used. The remediation companies say, we own the landfills. We don't want the water out of the water, the contamination out of the water quickly. When it hits the shores, then we make more money. It's really true. It is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life.
Thank you very much, Scott, for that. And Echo, one last question, and then I think we'll close it out because we've been on the phone for a long time. But thank you, everybody, for your time.
Yeah, just a really quick one I meant to bring up earlier when I was thinking about looking outside of the box with climate refugees, people having to leave places because of tidal waves, landslides, coastlines, et cetera, that places like this where people really will not be able to have clean water. They will not be able, a Band-Aid solution of bottled water is not a long-term solution for living with an otherwise permanently toxic well. The notion of sister cities, is there any connection that any of you know of in Palestine, East Palestine, of either people who have left, who would be open to making new neighborhoods for people who have to flee? Is there any support that you can think of, or openness for people who would leave if they could, but no one will buy their home? I mean, I've heard a number of interviews of people who, would leave. And then for the people who are staying, that they're warriors, incidental didn't choose to be, but they're warriors on the front lines of an active crime scene, as Bob was pointing out. So how to either support those who are staying and hopefully make them people who choose to stay, and to give people an option out. Is there climate, the idea of sister cities is what came to mind. Just is there openness? Do people want to leave? Is that what they even want? Anyway, thank you so much. And please give us, Scott, a way to be in touch in your in the chat. Email.
I gotta answer the question. Here's the problem. Okay. The EPA administrator, not cabinet position, doesn't have the phone number for housing and urban development, a cabinet post. If you look at the administration, the commerce secretary doesn't know, the energy secretary, who doesn't know the labor secretary. And so that's why there's this lack of coordination. If through social justice efforts, which is a big, big buzzword in the whole Biden Bucks program, if it were actually to work, the housing and urban development secretary, HUD, those guys would actually be on the ground working with EPA on these relocation efforts. don't even know, Secretary of Transportation was there, but, so what? There's the lack of coordination among and once again, not pointing fingers at any administration. It's been a failing system for 50 years.
Yep, good point.
This was a whole lot of information, everybody. Thank you very much, Scott and Bob, for bringing your wisdom, and for everybody who's gone already and spoken. Really appreciate everything you brought to the table. We're going to hand it over to Ansley, who's been really attuned to our nervous systems and the impact of this information to close us out.
And thank you, everybody. Yeah, what an informative session, activating, recognizing that compassion fatigue is a real thing. And after taking in all of this information, just bringing our bodies back to being at ease, our nervous systems, so that we can continue to fight the good fight, because we don't want anyone getting overwhelmed. So with that, I would invite us all to just take a deep breath and sigh. That's one of the easiest, quickest ways to relax our nervous systems. We just take in a deep breath. So I'll guide us. If you want to let all of your air out first. Take a deep breath in. And sigh it out. Be weird with it. Let's do one more. Take a deep breath in. Sigh it out. One more deep breath in. Sigh it out. And a little shake. Shake your hands out. Yeah. Our nervous system's the most important way that we can keep doing this and keep ourselves healthy while we try and keep other people healthy. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ansley. And for those of us who are interested, I put it a few times in here. A, make sure to get Scott's contact if you want to stay in touch. B, on spatial.io, some of us are leaning into the VR connected experience with Brian Krawitz. And we're going to just learn today, because I don't think any of us are Superstar VR experts in this crew. And so that's happening right after this. And thank you all very much for your time. This was a very informative, passionate session, and just appreciate the integrity.
Thanks.